Hello and welcome to The Load-In, a United Theater podcast with me, your host, Lee Metzger. Today we'll be talking about StoryCorps and the event that we'll be hosting on Friday, featuring a discussion with Dave Isay, the founder of StoryCorps, led by Stonington resident Gara LaMarche. So stick around and listen in on this most illuminating interview. It's The Load-In. As part of this incredible event on Friday, we also will be opening our own Voices of Westerly community recording booth, where anyone in the community can come in, sit down with a loved one or a friend or, a fellow community member and have a conversation and connect on a human level. It's difficult nowadays to see those who might disagree with us on the political spectrum as fellow humans. It's been an incredibly divisive period of time, and one of the hopes with this event and our community recording booth is to remind our fellow community members that everyone in the ocean community, we're just people, just humans. And we have love and respect and dreams and wishes just like anybody else. And it's sometimes hard to remember that. So this kind of functions as a way to sit down with the people in your life or the people in your community and share the things that make you human. Talk about what food you like and how you fell in love and heartbreak, things that are truly human experiences. And that's one of the things that is important and hard to remember nowadays. And that's part of the StoryCorps' mission. So ahead of this event on Friday, we welcome you to come down, and extending out a month or so after this, we'll have open door policy for anyone who wants to come in and have a lead conversation with a fellow community member or parent or children or, favorite bartender. You're welcome to come in and sit down and connect. So that being said, now we're going to dive into this interview with Gara LaMarche and talk a little bit more about the mission of StoryCorps, the impetus behind starting it, and what we hope you'll walk away from the event feeling like. It's The Load-In. We'll be right back. Today, a seasoned advocate for human rights and social justice joins us on The Load-In. With extensive experience including leading the Democracy Alliance and the Atlantic Philanthropies, this gentleman has played pivotal roles in advancing progressive causes, economic inclusion, and climate change initiatives. He's also been a key figure at the Open Society Institute, Human Rights Watch, and the ACLU. And currently, he is a teacher and leader in residence at the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership and a senior advisor to the Raben Group. Folks, I am honored to welcome Gara LaMarche to The Load-In. Welcome.
Great to be here, Lee.
How'd I do?
You did great.
Did I get them all?
I need to have such an extravagant introduction, but it's all factually correct.
Everything is true. So today, Gara joins us in conversation about this upcoming StoryCorps event on Friday. What is your involvement with StoryCorps?
Well, I've been involved with StoryCorps for at least 15 years or so. I joined the board of StoryCorps. Well, when I was in philanthropy, we provided some support for StoryCorps because we believed it a very important American institution. And they asked me to join the board about 15 or 16 years ago. And I was a member of the board for 14 years, and I was chair of the board for 9 years. So I led the board during a period of significant expansion and growth for StoryCorps, and it's one of my favorite institutions.
Yeah. So StoryCorps' mission is to help us believe in each other by illuminating the humanity and possibility in us all, one story at a time. So what is StoryCorps to you, and what do you think it means to the greater populace of the United States?
Well, StoryCorps is both very consistent with the social justice career that you described that I've had, but also a bit of a departure from most of what I've done. And here's how it's similar. It's similar in that it's based on a fundamental premise that every human life has value, and that every person has a story, or many stories that are compelling. So it's kind of a democracy of stories. And the accessibility of StoryCorps to everybody, that anybody can sit down, particularly now that we have an app that's very user-friendly, that can sit down with StoryCorps either in one of our mobile booths, or in the past in some of the fixed facilities that we had, or using the app. And there are hundreds of thousands of people who have already done this around the country. Anybody can sit down with their loved one and have a conversation about what's most meaningful to them. And what's come out of those, and we're going to play a lot of these at the United Theater on Friday night, are just some amazing stories that are as good as anything you'll find in cinema or fiction. So that's really important. At the same time, and we'll also talk about the fact that StoryCorps more recently has moved beyond having people who know each other talk to one another, which is often family members or close friends, to bringing strangers together to talk to one another about what they have in common. So that's a situation in which we are not trying to resolve people's political or ideological or cultural differences, but trying to get people to recognize their common humanity over and above those political differences. And it seems to us that at this particular moment in American life, where people are so polarized, that's very important. So although I come out of the kind of human rights, social justice, kind of left political part of the political spectrum in my career, StoryCorps is something I've been involved in, that it's a bit of a departure from that. It's something that for everybody across political differences, and that you can talk about with your, conservative uncle or your left-wing aunt at the dinner table and find some common ground. So for me, it's both consistent with the career that I've had, but also a bit of a departure from it, in that it's quite ideologically and culturally diverse.
Yes, incredibly diverse. So what you're talking about now is the One Small Step initiative, right? How did that idea come about? Like, where did that come from?
Well, I think as a lot of the best things about StoryCorps, it sprung from the passion and the mind of our founder, Dave Isay, so who I'll be having this conversation with at the United on Friday. Dave founded StoryCorps about 20 years ago. He was a radio documentarian. And he just had this very simple, basic idea that if you could put a microphone in front of two ordinary people, you get some really interesting results. And so nothing about StoryCorps was particularly targeted in the early years. It just grew out of the stories people wanted to tell. And then over time, we developed initiatives to respond to moments. Like, we recorded virtually every story of survivors of 9/11. There's a whole archive of that. We have a griot project about, Black voices, and care at the end of life, people recording things in hospice. We've had some targeted initiatives, but never as much as this. I think Dave thought 4 or 5 years ago that it was a dangerous trend in American life, where people didn't just have political and cultural differences, such as you might have, and you certainly have them in a town like Westerly, but that those differences were becoming so sharp that people were not seeing their fellow humans as fully human, and that was something that was a very bad trend in American life, and it's only exacerbated since then. So StoryCorps holds out the possibility that we can meet across our political differences and find some common ground. And so far, and we'll talk more about this, so far the early efforts to do that have been very encouraging. And the fact is, in my own career, demonstrates this. On the one hand, like most people, I don't come out of a family where everybody agrees with one another. You know, I'm kind of an outlier to some extent in my family, but I love my family members and they love me despite the fact, you know, that we may disagree sharply about things. I have Trumpist cousins and I love them despite that, and I think they love me despite that. And so we've, you know, my own life has shown that, and my career has shown that, because even though my career has been more on the left side of the American spectrum, I've always made a point of finding respectful relationships with conservative philanthropists, or when I was in the ACLU, with people who lobbied on the other side of me when I was running the Texas ACLU and testifying a lot in the Texas legislature. And I believe very strongly, as a personal matter, that I can be both a strongly committed progressive and also respect and have civil relationships with people who don't agree with me. And this is exactly what One Small Step's all about.
Yeah, it's a very American idea of like, we are all so different. It's to the core of what America is about, is this melting pot of all these different people. And it's kind of beautiful that where you're one of the first installation of the mobile recording booth was in Grand Central Station in New York. And it's like, is there any better example of a place where you can see literally anyone you can imagine in your mind, you can find them walking through those halls. The first time that I came across StoryCorps was, it was on, you know, some social media, and I saw a video. It was an animated video of, just like you said, an incredibly cinematic story. And I wish I could remember which one it was, but there, I remember it was between a husband and wife, and they were talking about, you know, their life together and like their journey of love and the ups and downs of that. And I remember just being like blown away by what seemed to be just like a conversation between two regular people.
Yeah, that may very well have been. There's one called Danny and Annie that we're going to play on Friday, which are some of the first people to record. And they're a couple from, I think, Queens, New York, and they're kind of like out of the honeymooners, as it were. But it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Their love affair is just so beautiful. I mean, a lot of people cry listening to StoryCorps stories. They pull over
I sure did.
the road on Friday morning. You know, so I think we may be handing out handkerchiefs at the United Theater. But they're both kind of basic human interest stories that have nothing to do with social justice as such. And then there are some really compelling stories. You know, a woman whose son was murdered by another young man. He went to prison. It was her only son. She went to prison to visit the young man who killed her son. They became close. When he got out of prison, he moved next door to her. She treats him as a son. It's the most amazing story of forgiveness and redemption that you could possibly imagine. Or there's a story we'll play called The Saint of Dry Creek, which is about a gay man talking about when he was a young man and who was a little flamboyant and tended to dress very unusually for his rural, I think, Nebraska or Kansas community. And his father was a farmer, you know, with cow manure on his boots all the time. And he was a bit embarrassed by his father, and he thought his father would be embarrassed by him. And yet there's a wonderful way he's accounting for a story of the father talking to him about how he has to be true to himself. And if he isn't true to himself, you know, he'll be miserable for the rest of his life. And he realized that his father, you know, in 1950s, you know, Kansas, you know, was telling him that it was okay to be himself. It's a very moving story. And there are funny stories too. We'll play some of those. But very often, and I've done myself, I know 7 or 8 different stories. And we're going to play a little quick montage that Dave made when I was honored by StoryCorps a couple of years ago, of my little snippets from my own interviews with my mother, who died 2 years ago. And I grew up in Westerly, and I live in Stonington. And my brother, my 2 daughters, my wife, just to kind of illustrate that everybody listening should take advantage of the opportunity to record stories. It's partly about listening to the stories. It's a great archive of stories. You can, it's better than spending a couple of hours on TikTok. You can go through the StoryCorps archive, but you can also be a participant, and I have been many times.
Yeah, you spoke about the app that is available now. How does that work?
Well, it's available on our website. It's originally Dave Isay, who founded it, was very particular about the how should I put it, the kind of specs of the recordings. We had an Airstream trailer that went around the country. It still does, where people can go and record with a high quality sound technician and all that kind of stuff. And I've done a lot of my interviews in that. But as the technology developed so that everybody has in their hand, the means to make a little movie or do a recording, it's accessible to anybody sitting in their living room, really. And so we now have a lot of stories emerge from that, not from people coming to our booths, because there's a limited number of people who can do that, but it's a kind of again, another kind of democratization of access. And we'll definitely want, our vision is that everybody in the country has access to this. And we see StoryCorps as, an essential institution of American life, like a library or a fire department, and it ought to be universal. And that's our mission, to make it more universal.
It's an incredible initiative. It gives me chills just talking about it. When people are leaving the event on Friday, what do you want them to take away from the event?
Well, I want them to be, in a sense, entertained. We're at a theater, an arts institution, and also a community institution. So we want to give them a good show, and I think they'll be moved and inspired by what they hear. We want them to think about their own lives and the stories that they have and the people they'd like to have conversations with. And we'd like them to see this as not the only one, because there's a lot of things that have to happen in this society to overcome the rancor and the polarization we have, but a way in which, however we slug it out about politics or culture, we don't lose sight of the fact that our neighbors are people like us, and we might strongly disagree with them about politics, but we may bond over our grandchildren or over sports or over some common ground that we have that recognizes each other as human beings. We're going a little too far down the road in this country, and I say this as somebody with very strong views about politics, of demonization of people we don't agree with. And when we look around the world of societies that have done that, it's not a happy story. We can avoid that, and one small step is one piece of that.
Well, it's a noble mission, and we're beyond excited to host you all. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else that you want to plug? Do you have any do you have any podcasts you want to plug?
I don't have my own podcast, but I do look forward to being in the stage of the United Theater, since as a child I went there every Saturday afternoon.
Local boy.
For 35 cents and watch whatever the latest Vincent Price horror movie was. And so the revival of the United Theater as all it was and much, much more is very exciting and meaningful to me as a local boy who loved it as a child and now sees it as a really essential kind of glue of a very wonderful community.
Well, we hope to maintain that. Gara, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I can't wait to see you on Friday. I'll be there.
Take care, Lee.
Excellent. All right. Cheers. So that was our interview with Gara LaMarche. And of course, at the end of every show, I like to go on Apple Podcasts and see if anyone has left a review for the show. So I'm going to pull up the load in and we'll see if anybody said anything. Oh, there's a new review. Okay, this is a review from July 12th, 2024 by username Why is every knock name taken? Why is every knock name taken writes, Harumph! What did I just listen to? Podcast, more like Nodcast. 5 stars. If you want your review to be read aloud on The Load-In, make sure to go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Give us as many stars as you think we deserve, and write a quick note, and I'll give you a shout out on the show. So shout out to Why is every knock name taken? Thanks for leaving a review. This has been The Load-In. I've been Lee Metzger, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the United Theater Podcast Network. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And if you could take a moment to leave a review, we'd greatly appreciate it. Your feedback helps us create content that you love. So hit that subscribe button and leave us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode.